Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum, and this is the show where we look at culture through a psychological lens. And there is so much to talk about this week. Honey, we are full up, so let's get to it. I'm a little irritated. I'm irritated at everything this week because there's so much lying going on. There's so much dishonesty. There's so much disingenuous behavior. People are saying one thing and meaning another. People are loading up their statements with illusions and assumptions that they want people to have in their minds, but they're claiming they're not doing it. And it's just everywhere. As I was getting throughout the week, I clip things for the show, right? So I noticed something on Twitter, I noticed something in the news, I noticed something in the New York Times, clip it, take a picture of it, get it ready for the show. And I just felt like it was over and over and over again this week. Especially about critical race theory and educating children. This is a big stage on which liars are playing out their dramas right now. I'm going to put up a picture here. Actually, we've broken it up into several. And don't worry, listeners, I will read it for you too. Critical race theory has taken over our culture within the past year just to an unbelievable degree. Everybody is talking about it. They're either hating it or they're loving it, or they're claiming that this thing that you think is critical race theory that you don't want our children to learn, that's not critical race theory. You don't even understand what it is. You can't even name what it is. Da 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 da. The conversation is a mess. But critical race theory, in plain layman's terms, is an analytical framework, a point of view for looking at race relations that sees all interactions between humans, all social interactions, all business interactions, sometimes family interactions, as fundamentally about race. And beneath the race part, as fundamentally about power. Critical race theory is Marxist in that way. You may have heard people making this accusation. I think this accusation is a correct analysis. Marxism posits that the primary relationship that we have to the wider world is one of power over. It's constantly a struggle for who's going to be in power, and it's a zero-sum game. Critical race theory sees race everywhere. It posits that in our society, and I'm not sure what it would say about other Western societies, probably much the same thing, but this is a prototypically American point of view, that all white people are inherently racist, that there's no way to be a white person in which you are not essentially racist. And they don't mean that everybody has maybe some uninformed biases or some leftover prejudices. That is not, they're not making that reasonable claim. They're claiming that white people inherently are racist, and that if white people do not actively and constantly notice their racism, call the racism out in their friends, check each other constantly, if they're not doing the work constantly, then every interaction they have with a person of color is going to be tainted by this power structure of white over and black under. And they want this, the proponents want this in public schools. This is the kind of stuff that they want to indoctrinate children with. This week, the National Education Association, which is the largest teachers union in this country and has been behind every effort to keep schools closed. Everybody's frightened of the pandemic. The children are going to spread the disease. All of this anti-factual nonsense. They've really showed themselves this year, the NAA has. And they're complaining now. They're complaining that they're getting a bad rap. And that people are claiming that they want to teach this critical race theory in schools, but they don't. They don't teach that. It's a legal theory. It's only taught to college students. Okay. Let's take a look at the minutes of the business meeting from June 30th of the National Education Association. This is business item number 39. and there's quite a bit to it. We'll go through it. This was adopted. They adopted this as a policy position. So, Part 1. The NEA will, with guidance on implementation from the NEA president and chairs of the Ethnic Minority Affairs Caucuses, and then it lists out A through E or F. A. Share and publicize through existing channels information already available on critical race theory, CRT, what it is and what it's not. Have a team of staffers for members who want to learn more and fight back against anti-CRT rhetoric, and share information with other NEA members as well as their community members. That's item A. They already sound like they're fans of critical race theory, don't you think? And I know the objection would be, no, this is about staff talking to staff. And none of it's ever going to trickle down into the classroom, and anybody who thinks that is just a wackadoodle right-wing conspiracy theorist. Kevin, we need a sound effect for when I do that wink, something like ding. Item B. Provide an already created, in-depth study that critiques empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis-heteropatriarchy. Sorry. We're all living in South Park now. Capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression at the intersections of our society. There's another one of their magic words, intersections. Intersectionality. And that we will oppose attempts to ban critical race theory and or the 1619 Project. Okay. Critical race theory isn't taught in schools. It's a legal theory only for scholars and college students. You don't know what it is. That's not what we're talking about. We're not teaching that. You're crazy. Really? Really? Then why does the National Education Association need to oppose attempts to ban critical race theory and or the 1619 Project? And the 1619 Project is the brainchild of Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times, an alleged journalist who's a professional race baiter and a narcissist, in my view, who claims that this country was not founded in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, but in 1619 when the first slaves came off a ship into the New World, more than a century before the United States was actually founded. But that's our real founding date, 1619, she says. Let's go to item C. Publicly, through existing media, convey its support, that is, convey support from the National Education Association, convey its support for the accurate and honest teaching of social studies topics, including thoughtful and age-appropriate accountings of unpleasant aspects of American history, such as slavery and the oppression and discrimination of indigenous, black, brown, and other peoples of color. This is really badly written. The grammar is actually really bad. As well as the continued impact this history has on our current society. The association will further convey that in teaching those topics, it is reasonable and appropriate for curriculum to be informed by academic frameworks for understanding and interpreting the impact of the past on current society, including critical race theory. I want to show you what they just did there because it's not obvious on the surface. People who are calling their bluff on this bullshit when they claim they don't want to teach critical race theory to American school children are pointing out that, of course, whatever they call it, whether they call it CRT in the classroom or not, they are teaching the concepts of critical race theory. And these people are saying, no, we're only teaching that at college. We're only teaching that to teachers. As if somehow that wasn't going to trickle down, as if they were teaching this to teachers so that the teachers won't do anything with it, won't translate it into the classroom. That's nonsense, of course, but this is their response. And this paragraph, this is another sleight of hand. We will convey our support for the accurate and honest teaching of social studies topics, including truthful and age-appropriate accountings of unpleasant aspects of American history, etc., etc., etc. All of this is based on the premise that somehow public schools are not already and have not been teaching history, the unpleasant parts of history that are part of our collective history in the United States. I haven't been in public school for a while, but I have a very difficult time believing that unless things have changed drastically in a direction that I would not predict since I was in school. When I was a school kid in the 1980s, in social studies, and I think outside of social studies too, we were taught about slavery, the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman. In fact, I remember this being one of the, I found this absolutely fascinating. It was one of my favorite parts of primary school, because it was a window into a world that seemed to have happened in the incredibly distant past, but yet this was my country. This was going on in the very place that I lived, right? And the story of the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman is, and I say this in the very basic original sense of this term, not the modern term that has love and sexual connotations. This story is incredibly romantic in the sense that it has everything you need for high drama. It has people who are viciously oppressed. It has good guys. It has bad guys. It has incredible heroism, ingenuity, smarts, ability to think on the fly and outsmart your captors. Really loved studying this, but we learned that. We learned about the Civil War. We learned about Reconstruction. We learned about Jim Crow. Then we learned about Rosa Parks. We learned about Martin Luther King. We learned about the Civil Rights Act. This was all part of our curriculum in public school. Now, I realize that education standards have gone down over the years. I think that's true, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. I don't think many of us are happy with the standards in our public schools now. But I have a hard time believing that the unpleasant parts of history have just been whitewashed away, because ever since I was in school, we have become ever more obsessed with grievance. And I don't mean to write off actual oppression like slavery as grievance. When I say grievance, I mean worrying and beating the same dead horse over and over and over again as if we had made no progress, as if the Civil Rights Act had not been passed, as if redlining, refusing to give mortgage loans to black people, as if things like this had not been made illegal, which they have been made illegal, right? Let's go on to the next one. D, join with Black Lives Matter at school and the Zinn Education Project. I believe that's based on Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States or People's History of America, to call for a rally this year on October 14th, George Floyd's birthday, as a national day of action to teach lessons about structural racism and oppression, followed by one day of action that recognize and honor grammar and spelling mistakes as in the original, folks. This is their stuff. This is the National Education Association. It's not me misspeaking, okay? They don't do subject-verb agreement, apparently. Followed by one day of action that recognize and honor lives taken, such as Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, and others. The National Education Association shall publicize these national days of action, that's capitalized, by the way, National Days of Action, including an NEA Today. I'm guessing that's their house organ, their magazine. Black Lives Matter, the avowedly Marxist organization that until it took this down from the website and tried to disappear it, called for the destruction of the nuclear family. I'm not making this up. If you don't believe me, and you shouldn't believe me just because I say it, although I believe I'm trustworthy and I tell you where I find these things out, go behind me and look this up. This is an organization that has been involved with protests that have turned into riots, that have turned into burning police buildings and government buildings in American cities during the summer of 2020. This is the organization that is headed up by a bunch of very self-regarding people who somehow found themselves in possession of millions of dollars that had been donated to the organization that they then turned around and spent on their personal real estate portfolios to live in mansions. Really, NEA? Black Lives Matter? And we have to celebrate this on George Floyd's birthday? George Floyd? Yes, George Floyd, the man who was killed by Officer Derek Chauvin. No. No, that shouldn't have happened. No, he shouldn't have died. Yes, it was a tragedy. But George Floyd was a lowlife criminal, a drug addict, a drug dealer, with a prior arrest record as long as anyone's arm, including pointing a gun at a pregnant woman. He's not a hero. Doesn't mean he deserved to die. He's not a hero. This shouldn't be controversial. I shouldn't have to say this. On to item E. Conduct a virtual listening tour that will educate members on the tools and resources needed to defend honesty in education, including but not limited to tools like CRT. Critical race theory. Final item. Commit President Becky Pringle to make public statements across all lines of media that support racial honesty in education, including but not limited to critical race theory. But critical race theory is not being taught in public schools. We are not teaching critical race theory to children. You're making that up. You can't even define critical race theory. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're alt-right. You're a liar. You're trying to make us look bad. This is what we hear daily on the television news, on social media, and in the newspapers. It's right here. It's right here. Lest you think that the NEA is the only union getting in on the say one thing and do another game, think again. We put up this image. This is the pictures we're going to show you are two images, two tweets from the American Federation of Teachers. Their Twitter handle is AFT Union. First one. Let's be clear. Critical race theory is not taught in elementary or high schools. It is a method of examination taught in law school and college that helps analyze whether systemic racism exists, and in particular, whether it has an effect on law and public policy. End of the tweet. Okay, so it's not taught in public schools. Did you hear that? It's taught in colleges. It's a legal theory. This is what they fall back on. I believe that critical race theory was thought up by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a lawyer, and an activist and a professor. And I think an academic named Derek Bell may have had something to do with founding it as well. And yes, it was first used as a way to analyze citizens' interactions in the legal system in America, but it is not a legal theory, right? It's not. And it's not restricted just to law schools either. But anyway, as they say, let's be clear, critical race theory is not taught in elementary or high schools. Let's fast forward in time and look at another tweet they sent after this one. American Federation of Teachers. Watch AFT Secretary-Treasurer, somebody named Ingram, on ABC's Good Morning America about how teaching critical race theory allows educators to, quote, give our students the opportunity to understand the full breadth and depth of the American society, end quote. Watch the full clip now. Oh my God, they're such shameless liars. You know what they will say to that? The response to that, the rebuttal will be, It's like they said, they're not teaching it in schools. This is about how teaching critical race theory, how we teach it to educators. And it doesn't trickle down from there. We're just teaching it to grown-ups, not to kids. I mean, I'm sorry, I have to do voices. They're just lying. They're like little kids who get caught literally red-handed. Not only with their hands in the cookie jar, one hand in the cookie jar, the other hand around a fistful of chocolate chip cookies with brown stuff smeared all over their faces saying, "Nah, I didn't do it." Drives me absolutely nuts. But let me not prime you too much for this one so that your first reaction and analysis is genuine and authentic. One of the people who is fighting the introduction of critical race theory into public school curricula is journalist and activist Christopher Rufo. He's an editor at the online publication City Journal. He's a conservative. And I think it's fair to say that he's not just a journalist, he's an activist now. I don't think he would take issue with that because he is an activist. His activism is stopping this. And they have been successful. He and several other people from other organizations have successfully passed bills in 9 states so far, I believe, that would ban critical race theory being taught to public school students. And what's important to understand about that, they're not saying, they don't actually name it in these bills, you may not teach critical race theory. They get to the actual substance. They're not talking about banning something because they don't like the name or they don't like the branding that someone else gave it. They do not object to it because it's someone else's favorite and they don't like it. They're objecting to the actual substance and content. So these bills outlaw things like teaching children that one race is inherently superior to another or inherently inferior to another. And they also ban things like teaching children that if you are a member of a racial or ethnic category that historically in the past has participated in the slave trade, for example, you can't teach children that they pay for the sins of their fathers. I mean, this is really uncontroversial stuff when you read these bills. I haven't read all of them cover to cover, and there may be some in there that have gone too far, and I would certainly be willing to take a look at that. But that's what they get at. That's what they're stopping schools from teaching. Who objects to this? Who thinks it's okay to teach children that one race is inherently superior or inferior to another? So that's what Christopher Rufo is involved in. And of course, he's taking flack from all over the place on the left. They're calling him the race baiter. They're calling him a grifter, which is what everybody calls everyone today when they don't like their point of view. And Chris has been particularly mindful and has had a lot of criticism for big media figures who are pushing this and acting as if those of us who are objecting to teaching CRT in schools are actually racist, and we don't want children to know about slavery. We don't want them to know about mortgage redlining. We don't want them to know that blacks used to have to sit at the back of the bus, that we don't want them to know that there were fountains for white people and fountains for colored only. That's not what we're saying. So Chris finally got invited begrudgingly onto MSNBC host Joy Reid's show so that they could talk this out. Let's look at some of this and put my big ugly cans on here and see what you think about this discussion. See if you think it was actually a discussion.
You say that Ibram Kendi, Dr. Ibram Kendi, is a college professor. You call him the guru of critical race theory. So we reached out to him. I've interviewed him before. So we reached out to him because you say he's the guru of critical race theory. You name him a lot in a lot of both in your manifesto or your talking points memo, but also in your video. We reached out to him. We asked him if he's a critical race theorist. He said, I admire critical race theory, but I don't identify as a critical race theorist. I'm not a legal scholar, so I wasn't trained on critical race theory. I'm a historian. And Chris would know this if he actually read my work or understood that critical race theory is taught in law schools. I didn't attend law school, which is where critical race theory is taught. It's really the only place it's taught. NBC has looked into everywhere, and it's not taught in elementary school. But hold on a second. This is the second thing he said, which is strange to me that you...
Let me respond. This is not a monologue. This should be a dialogue, right? Am I right?
It's my show, so it's how I want to do it. So let me read you one more quote from him, because you've made a lot of claims about critical race theory saying that white Americans are inherently racist, that racism is inherent to whiteness. And that is one of the core charges that you're making about, these sort of what you consider like sort of woke studies in school. This is what Ibram Kendi has said in his own words. He said, we've been taught that racist is essential to who a person is. It's a fixed category. It's in someone's heart. That's one of the reasons why people are unwilling to or unable to admit the times in which they're being racist, because it's not just admitting I was being racist in that moment. Basically, we're tattooing racist on our forehead for the rest of our lives. Isn't that the opposite of what you're arguing?
Well, I'll say two things. First of all, it's very interesting to me that so many people are now running away from the race of the label of critical race theory. But
he's not a critical race theorist.
Hold on. I'm going to quote two critical race theorists. Barbara Applebaum with the book Being Good, Being White. She says, quote, all white people are racist. Robin DiAngelo, who's another critical whiteness studies scholar, says that, quote, all white identity is inherently racist. So what you're doing is you're playing a series of word games. You know that critical whiteness studies is a subfield of critical race theory?
No, it's not.
These things are all deeply interrelated.
No, they're not.
And I'm not going to let you play word games. And this is really, I think, the most essential thing.
Hold on. No.
Let me respond at least once. I haven't gotten a full sentence out.
Because I'm not going to let you. See, one of the things that, and I don't know, you probably never watched me on TV, just, we didn't know who each other were, not so long ago. But I don't allow people to just make up and say lies on the show. It's just not really right to do that and let people hear. But hold on.
But
Robin
DiAngelo,
wait.
Am I right
Robin
or wrong?
DiAngelo is not a critical race theorist, and I want everyone to know that. Robin DiAngelo, I don't know who the other woman is, but she's not. But let's just go through a minute, because whiteness, and racist. Whiteness and racist.
Sure.
Where did the term whiteness come from?
Sure, and I think this is an important point, and I hope you let me actually get a full paragraph out about this.
Go for it.
But whiteness is the idea that there is some kind of metaphysical category in the world, that all white people are reducible to this essence of whiteness. Then what happens is that they load all of these negative connotations. They say that whiteness is, by definition, that includes white fragility, includes white privilege, includes internalized white superiority. And then what they do is they try to impose these reductive racial categories onto individuals. And I actually agree with Kendi's approach. I think that we should fight race essentialism. But the problem is that critical race theory enshrines race essentialism.
But you
and you see it in schools. And I'll give you 3 examples of critical race theory being taught in schools.
Hold on one second.
In Cupertino, California.
These are in your talking points, sir. Chris, these are in your talking points, and I know what you're going to say because you said it with Mark Lamont Hill. You repeat these same things. They're in this manifesto. People can read it online. Let me just go for a second. On the subject of whiteness, are you aware, since you say that I guess you're sort of a quasi-historian in your thinking, that whiteness was actually formed in the United States? That whiteness didn't even exist as a thing. Europeans were all European. They considered themselves Italian or Polish or whatever. When the colonists came here, they actually created the idea of whiteness. This is from the Smithsonian.
I agree with that.
As a way to distinguish themselves from what they call the savages, the natives, and from black people, from Africans, who even if you had a little African in you, if you're Plessy, who's 7/8 white, if you are African in any aspect, that you are reduced of rights. So people that you don't like, that are doing this sort of wokeness training, are saying whiteness has always had power. There used to be a saying, I'm free white and 18. It was commonly said in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So whiteness has power. So people who want to decouple whiteness from power, that's what you're annoyed by, right? Let me play a little bit of what you said.
Okay, that's enough. Was that a conversation? I don't think so. If you're just listening and you weren't watching that, all the time she kept saying, no, no, you're not going to do that. No. She's got this smile on her face. It's not a real smile. It's not a smile where the eyes match the mouth. It's a fake smile. No, you're not going to do that. Not going to do that. And she's wagging her finger. She's wagging her finger in front of her, in front of the camera. No. These are in your talking points. People can just read those. Joy, people are watching your show to get the information from your show. They don't want to have to read something. You won't let him speak. And she says, it's my show, so it's how I want to do it. Yeah. Sweetie, we know. We know how self-regarding you are. And you heard it there, right? You heard her say, because it's not taught in schools. Critical race theory is not taught in schools. It's only taught in law schools. You see, they are all reading from the same script. She accuses Christopher Rufo of having talking points. Well, she's got her talking points too. They all do. Ibram X. Kendi. By the way, if you didn't know this, Ibram X. Kendi is not that man's name. It's not. Might be legally his name, but it's a name that he chose and adopted. Do you want to know what his name is? Henry Rogers. But Ibram X. Kendi sounds elevated, doesn't it? I think of it as a sort of, you know what it is? It's a sort of ethno-aristocratic name. I suspect that he chose it because Henry Rogers simply isn't that interesting. He wanted to sound unique and special, and he also wanted to evoke certain associations in people. Wise elder. The X has connotations of Malcolm X, right? Kendi sounds sort of African. These people's personas are all constructed. There's nothing genuine about these people. They can't even tell the truth. We've got a lot more, folks. See you after the break. Hey, listeners, we now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us. And thank you. Welcome back. Let's talk about COVID a little bit. The White House has plans. Now, let's go to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki to hear what those plans are.
In more healthcare settings and respond to hotspots. The president will outline 5 areas his team is focused on to get more Americans vaccinated. 1, targeted community by community door-to-door outreach to get remaining Americans vaccinated by ensuring they have the information they need on how both safe and accessible the vaccine is. 2, a renewed emphasis on getting the vaccines to more primary care doctors and physicians, something that we've seen.
Okay. They want people, they're going to get people to go door to door to harangue them to get the vaccine. I think I saw a statistic the other day that 67% of Americans are fully vaccinated, which of course leaves 33% who are not. And they really, really don't like the fact that some of us are not vaccinated. So much so that they want to send out volunteers to go door to door and get people to get vaccinated. Do you want this knocking on your door? What is this? What is this? I saw a memo from one municipal body. It was a city in America. I don't remember which one it was. I should have clipped it so I could show it to you on the show. But it was a memo to volunteers that this city is recruiting, presumably with the blessing of the White House and probably with federal money for this campaign, about going door to door and asking people about their vaccination status and leaving helpful information, as Jen Psaki says, about how safe and accessible it is. That's another one. That word, accessible. We have a fetish with this word, access and accessible. We want to make sure everyone has access. It's very accessible. You can access it. Over the past probably 10 years or so, we have inserted the word access before other statements. I think in an attempt to distance ourselves from what we're actually saying, or to make boring things that we're saying sound much more erudite and interesting than they really are. As an example, you don't usually hear people say, and I would say you don't hear newscasters say, but now you don't actually hear people in the real world say this. You don't hear them say, these people don't have health insurance. Instead, you hear them say they don't have access to health insurance. Or if it's a topic about hunger, well, it can't be hunger. It's now food insecurity. They're not hungry. They're food insecure. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to proper nutrition. It's not accessible to them. Anyway, language stuff like this, I notice it a lot. It probably bothers me more than it bothers other people, but I had to point it out. So this memo that I saw was instructing volunteers on how to approach people when they knock on their doors about the vaccine and how not to take no for an answer. And one of the first things in that memo was, and it was in bold type, ignore no soliciting signs. That was their direct instruction. Ignore no soliciting signs. Knock anyway. Why? Well, because as the memo says, you're not soliciting! Exclamation point. And yes, they put the exclamation point there. You're not soliciting. You're offering them helpful information to make sure that they can make an informed choice. Yeah, well, the Mormons say that. The Jehovah's Witnesses say that. And people put up no soliciting signs to keep them out. I think they'd like to keep you out too, Miss Psaki. Unbelievable. For a little more, well, is it really unbelievable? Not really, is it? Let's go to the UK. Our friends in the UK are not generally as mad about COVID as we are here, but there are some of them. And I was scrolling through Twitter and found this image. Take a look at this. So it's a picture of the inside of an office, just any standard corporate office park. And it's a windowsill, and there are 3 boxes with 3 signs, one next to another. And in each of those boxes is a set of lanyards, the sort of woven cloth necklaces that you wear around your neck that has your key card or your employee ID on it. And these lanyards are in 3 colors, red, yellow, and green. And the 3 colors mean 3 different things. The first sign for the red lanyard says, "Hi, I'm keeping my distance." Second pile, yellow lanyards, sign says, "Okay with talking, but not touching." Third one says, "Okay with hugs and high fives." Ugh. Ugh. Let's get that out of the way first. This touchy feeling, see, I have mixed feelings about this. This is nonsense. It's ridiculous. But why are we in offices now in the US or the UK where we have to tell people not to hug us? Have you noticed this? I don't know if you have, because I don't know what kind of office you work in or whether you work in an office at all. But I have noticed that we have gotten so informal at work that the kinds of behaviors that are more appropriate to a family reunion, a barbecue, a birthday party, a celebration among friends, we're taking those behaviors into the workplace. So people are hugging and sharing their feelings. And there's a phrase that I don't know if it has as much currency anymore, but bring your whole self to work is part of that whole way of looking at work. Bring your whole self to work? No, bring your work self to work. Don't bring your religion, your family, your sex life, your trauma, your dogs, what you did on the weekend. I don't want people bringing their whole selves to work. Now, I don't want to bring my whole self to work. I want to bring my work self to work. But these lanyards, color-coded lanyards, this is romper room. This is infantilization of fully grown adults. Color-coded little messages to hang around your neck. Hi, I'm keeping my distance. So apparently, I don't know, what does that mean? Stand 6 feet away? Okay with talking, but not touching. I mean, obviously people shouldn't be excessively touching each other in the workplace anyway, but this is probably meant to fend off somebody simply tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Oh, hey, Jane, by the way, the meeting is starting." We need a color-coded sign for this. And the okay with hugs and high fives. Ugh. Ugh. I'll tell you what, if I see anybody with a green lanyard on, I'm quitting. Because this is a hugger and I don't want those people hugging me. And I'm happy to say that a lot of people reacted to this the way I think they should react, which is, we're adults. Why is this necessary? This looks like kindergarten, or as you Brits would say, reception. But there were a few people, of course, who thought it was a very fine idea, and maybe it didn't go far enough. So I clipped a couple of them for you. This is from a Twitter user who calls herself Clarence the Cross-Eyed Lion. And she says, "Why should the uncomfortable people be forced to work in an office with the touchy-feely denial virus spreaders? Again, they don't make it easy. They have to get chocolate in my peanut butter. They have to mix things up. I don't like the touchy-feely people either, but she doesn't like them for different reasons, because they're denial virus spreaders." You see this, right? This is splitting. We talk on the show a lot about the psychological distortions that affect how people relate to each other, that cause conflict, that cause misunderstanding, and this is one of them. This is splitting. And splitting is a very common psychological distortion that you see in people who have borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Splitting is the idea that a person or a concept or an idea is either all good or all bad. There's no gray area in between. There has been so much splitting, psychological splitting going on in our culture, and so many people are doing it. While splitting is a very frequent feature, in fact, I don't believe I've ever seen a case of somebody who had borderline personality disorder, or who I suspected had borderline personality disorder, who did not engage in splitting. There may be some cases out there, but that one is really a leading indicator. However, the converse is not true. Everybody who splits does not necessarily have borderline personality disorder. As I've said before, personality disorder traits are really actually human psychological traits. They are not restricted, most of them. They're not restricted just to people with cluster B personality disorders. We can all split. I've split, you've split. What separates the disordered people from the non-disordered people, or from the severely compromised people from those who function at a more normal level, is the degree to which they do it and how frequently they do it. Is it a pattern? Do they use this psychologically distorted point of view to approach every relationship and every conversation they have, or most of them? So we're all engaging in a lot of splitting in this country over politics. You know, you're either a lefty or you're a righty. You're either, you love Trump or you absolutely hate him and you think he is the devil incarnate. I engaged in a lot of splitting myself about this kind of stuff when I was a Democrat, a partisan Democrat. And even, as I've said before, my change of political heart, my change of mind about politics and policies and what ideas are helpful and what ideas are damaging for our society, that all started when I faced the problems in my home, the domestic abuse, the problems with my deranged mother. But it didn't come all at once. When I had that rupture in 2016, that began the process for me, and that's when I began to see that the psychological distortions I was used to dealing with at home, the splitting, the pathological lying, the paranoia, almost to the point of dissociation, that I was seeing in my mother, I started noticing happening in the society all around me. But it took me several years after that point for me to really get to grips with the fact that I was still stuck in a mode of splitting. I was seeing people as either all good or all bad. And not everybody and not all the time, but way too much to be healthy. My outlook on this was not healthy. I was measuring people's moral worth by whether they had an L or an R after their name. I was splitting. We see this in everything. Remember, half the show's 40% digressions, and that was another one. So there was one more response to this that I wanted to share with you. to the lanyards, the color-coded lanyards. You don't know. You really don't know. You really don't know if you have woken up and you are actually in a South Park episode or if this is the real world. So somebody who calls himself Streetwise Hercules on Twitter posted a picture of a lanyard, a bright green lanyard with images of sunflowers running across the ribbon, and had this to say: "These are great, although the green could get confusing with the green disability sunflower lanyard. So maybe could use blue or something different instead, even a lighter shade of lime green." This could get confused with the green disability sunflower lanyard. What is the green disability sunflower lanyard? Maybe this is inside baseball, and maybe I didn't see the first reference, but this strikes me as this guy thinks that the green disability sunflower lanyard is a universally recognized symbol, like an octagonal red sign that says stop on the road and means that you have to stop your car. The green disability sunflower lanyard. Oh, rescue me. Rescue me. Okay, so let's go to some things that are not quite so funny. Talked about this on the last episode, or maybe it was the episode before. Who knows? They're all blurring together at this point because this stuff goes on and on and on. You know, there are times, and it happens every week. I'm one of those people that somehow there are some emotional lessons that I don't learn. Every single week, I have at least 1 or 2 points where I say to myself, I'm never going to find anything to talk about on the show this week. I'm never going to have anything. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to have anything interesting for people. This is my own neurosis and anxiety that's disconnected from reality. So there's a window into my own distorted mentation. But there's never going to be a week where I don't have things to talk about with you. There's never going to not be this stuff because it just keeps coming. So we talked about the protest at We Spa in Los Angeles. And what happened there was a video came out. A woman who was a patron of this spa, it was a Korean-style spa, so it had a section for men and women. I believe, I don't know if the whole spa was, but there were spots where you could go nude. You could sit in the steam room nude. You could get a massage. You can get a manicure. You can get something to eat. You could play board games with other people or with your family. But it is sex segregated, as spas usually are. So this woman was in the women's section, the nude women's section of the spa. And I believe she had her daughter with her. There were young girls there with their mothers. And a man walked in, a full-on man, swinging his dick and balls. And this woman went rip shit and put her towel on, put her bathrobe on, got her phone rolling so that she was taping herself, and went out to the front desk and spoke to the staff and say, why is there a man showing his penis and testicles in there? Why are you letting men in here? There are little girls and women in here. There are naked women and little girls. And the staff member, this young petite woman, was defending it and saying it was California law and that must be her gender identity. I don't know who that man was. We looked at a social media post last time from somebody who I believe was the man who did this, calling himself a trans woman, but I couldn't actually say that for certain. But if it was this guy, this is just you could see him. He was a man, a muscular man. Didn't look anything like a woman, wasn't even trying to look like a woman, at least in the postings that I saw from him. Trying to look like a creep with a suffocation fetish, with saran wrap or a plastic bag over his face in one of the photographs. Really disturbing. So that's what happened there. And of course, the media don't report on this honestly. They won't come right out, the respectable media, and call this woman who complained a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist. They'll do everything but. The Washington Post had a headline about this, and again, I should have clipped this, but you'll get it from what I'm saying to you. The headline read, women complain about transgender person coming into the spa, and they claimed, and here's the important part, they claimed they were traumatized, and they put traumatized in inverted commas, in quotation marks. as if it were dubious that anyone could be traumatized. I mean, yes, of course, there are worse traumas than seeing a penis and testicles. It's not something on a par with actual rape. I get that. That's not what they mean when they use the inverted commas. They're not thinking about the fear that a woman would feel being vulnerable and naked with a man who appears to be over 6 feet tall, walking and striding in with his genitals on display. What about the little girls in there? Do you think they felt fear? I think they did. But they have to denigrate this. They have to put traumatized in quotation marks. And the implication is very clear. What they want you to take from that, to me, is very clear. They want you to see it as silly. They want you to see it as women making things up, claiming to be hurt when they're not actually, and they want you to think of it as a pitiful expression of bigotry from historical throwbacks who should be embarrassed to say anything like that in public. That's the Washington Post. That's what they think of you. That's what they think of these women. So there was a protest outside the WeSpa, largely women, feminists and women, protesting against their policy and saying something's got to change here. We cannot have a full-on man walking in here and just saying he's a trans woman and claiming he has a gender identity. This is outrageous. So, of course, women are not allowed to say no to cock. Women are not allowed to say no to men in dresses. Women are not allowed to say no to men in their bathrooms. They're not allowed to shield their daughters from it. And they sure as shit are not allowed to protest. So a counter-protest was organized. By whom, you ask? Antifa. Anti-fascists, right? No. No. This is a no membership dues club for the maladjusted, the disordered, and casual psychopaths. And I mean psychopaths. I do mean sociopaths. People without a conscience, people who enjoy exploiting other people, and people who get pleasure and who smile at their ability to hurt other people. That is what Antifa is. So let's take a look at what Antifa did at this protest. So this video that we're about to roll for you is one of, I mean, there are dozens of them covering this from different angles. These guys, these Antifa guys, and I'm sorry to say, a bunch of young women too, who look equally disordered as the men are there, surrounded one of the female protesters and harassed her and started ripping up her sign. Take a look at this. You can hear it too. Listen to what they chant.
That sign doesn't do anything for anyone.
They're surrounding this woman. They just ripped her sign, took it out of her hands. Now they're trying to prevent her from leaving. They've taken her hat off. They're throwing her hat. They've made a circle around her. They pushed her up against a wall. Somebody stole her sunglasses. They just called her Karen.
I don't give a fuck, bitch. Get out of here.
Get out of here, bitch. I don't give a fuck, bitch.
You can walk away. Get the fuck out. I'm not leaving till I get my Go home, transphobe. Go home, transphobe.
That's another one. You know how exercised I got in the final segment of last week's show, how angry I got watching that Ohio legislator Mike Skindell shout down Representative Jenna Powell when she was trying to introduce an amendment to protect women's sports. This makes me feel that way too. It makes me almost shake a little bit. For those of you who can't see what's on the screen, This is outside the spa in LA, and this woman, she appears to be, I don't know, 40, 45. She's my age. She's a normal-looking woman. They chased her. They took her hat off and threw it. They took her sunglasses. They ripped her protest sign out of her arms, out of her hands, and then they ripped it up and threw it on the ground in front of her. And then they formed a circle around her. And one guy had his skateboard up like a battering ram or a shield. He was pushing against her with the skateboard. They've got her backed up against a concrete wall on the side of the building. She's standing there. Her sign's been taken. Her hat's been taken. I don't even know if she has her phone. She's clearly frightened. She's trying not to show it. Good for her. And these motherfuckers from Antifa are surrounding her. They're pointing their finger in her face. They're shouting at her. They're calling her a bitch. They're telling her to go home. They're refusing to give her items of clothing back that they stole. They are intimidating her, and no one is doing anything. This stuff is going on all over the place. If you don't see this, if you haven't seen this, except when you tune into a show like this one, I could play clips of this. I could do a whole show of just clips like this every single week and not play the same one. This is what happens whenever women try to stand up for their rights. It's been happening in the UK. It's been happening in the US. And if you just take what these people say about themselves at face value and you just believe their branding, well, Antifa, I still hear people say this. Well, their name just means anti-fascist. They're against fascists. You're against fascists, right? What's your beef with them? What's your complaint with them? That's not who they are. They're thugs. They're malcontents. Some of them are career criminals. You see them at every riot and arson in Portland, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. They've basically ruled that city at least since last summer, and probably before. Journalist Andy Ngo has been covering this and has had his life put in jeopardy. They beat the tar out of him and put him in the hospital twice. They want to kill him, and they say they want to kill him. They're not shy about saying this. Folks, they say it. They make these threats, and still, when these Antifa guys go up in front of judges, they get released on their own recognizance, or they get released on bail they can afford, or their charges get dismissed, and they keep coming back over and over and over again. And some of these guys have past criminal records. They've been convicted of assault, robbery, theft. Psychopaths. These are psychopaths. Not all of them, but a whole bunch of them. And anybody who is swept along with this, I look at these young women in here, and I think some of these young women are psychopaths too. But they're not all. They're vulnerable to the manipulations and influence of psychopaths and narcissists, pathological people who want to hurt other people. Some of them have borderline personality disorder. Borderlines are extraordinarily vulnerable to malignant narcissists and sociopaths. They get into a dyad with them. They marry them. They sleep with them. They join organizations that are run by them. They get into an abuse back and forth with them. They usually come out on the losing end. These women, especially these women with borderline personality disorder, I'm not without sympathy for them, because they usually end up getting beaten, getting stolen from, getting prostituted, getting battered. That's what happens to them. But they continually reinsert themselves in a position to be abused by these guys, and these guys know it. They sniff these vulnerable young women out. Dangerous. They are not anti-fascist. They are psychopaths. One more. And this one is disturbing. I'm going to play this video for you before we end this segment. You may remember this from a few months ago. A couple of girls in Washington, D.C. carjacked a driver who was a delivery driver for Uber Eats doing food delivery. They carjacked him, and it ended up killing him. And I want you to see what happened before I tell you the end of this story.
She's still in her car. He's still in the car. Yeah, call the cops. Call the cops. Call the cops. It's been called. It's been called. It's been called. It's been called. They stole the car. These girls stole the car. Hey, they stole the car. They stole the car. These girls. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it.
Everybody needs to step back in the seat.
That's all what happened. Yeah, hey, back up, back up, back up.
So again, if you're only listening and cannot see that, these girls hijacked this guy's car with him in it. It took off down the street. I don't know if somebody was driving or if in the fight the accelerator got jammed down. Car went down the street, ended up crashing and ended up on its side. This man was ejected. The man who owned the car, his name is Mr. Anwar, flung 20 feet from the car against a concrete wall, and you can see in the video that his corpse is lying there. And as that's happening, one of these girls, these are both teen girls, the girl is being dragged away by a bystander. She crawls out of the car, and a bystander is dragging her away, and she yells, "My phone is still in there. My phone is still in there." This is what the law calls depraved indifference. And that's a good description of the psychopathic mindset. Callous disregard for life and depraved indifference to the health and safety of somebody else. My phone's still in there. My phone is still in there. That was the first thing that occurred to her. And the reason I showed you this is because I wanted to show you the headline about the story that happened about their sentencing. These girls were tried this week and I believe sentenced to juvenile detention. I believe at least one of them pleaded guilty to murder. And the headline from the newspaper The Hill, and of course because I thought I was being so very careful, here it is, found it. This is the headline on the article. 14-year-old sentenced to juvenile detention over carjacking of Uber Eats driver in D.C. Carjacking? There's a phrase in the newspaper business. I started out actually as a newspaper reporter. I spent 3 years as a reporter before I got into the nonprofit world. There's a phrase called burying the lead, meaning burying the most important part of the story until way down at the bottom. This is burying the lead. It's ignoring the lead. They killed him. Whether or not they intended to, that was the consequence of their actions. They stole this guy's car. The car went out of control, and it killed this man, this father, who was working a second job to feed his family. And all the Hill can say about this is 14-year-old sentenced to juvenile detention center over carjacking. As if they just stole the car and that was the worst thing that happened was that the car got stolen. You can't even trust respectable media to be truthful. It's grim. Come back on the other side, we've got more. Make sure to subscribe to Disaffected on your favorite streaming audio platform so you can take us along for the ride. Find us on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and almost anywhere else you get your podcasts. Welcome back. I want to say thank you to all of you who have signed up on Patreon and Subscribestar to support the show. Thank you very much. If you would like to support us, you can go to patreon.com/disaffected or to subscribestar.com/disaffected. We also have a website, disaffected.fm, so if ever you forget any of the places where you want to look for us, any of the audio platforms, the video platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Rumble, YouTube. All of that is linked very prominently. Just remember our website, disaffected.fm. And we are having our first supporters-only Zoom hangout. So if you want to get in on that, join us, support us on either Patreon or Subscribestar. If you do, you'll get an invitation. Our first hangout is happening next week, Sunday, July 18th at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. So join. I would love to see you. It's just going to be casual. We're just going to get to know each other. It's going to be private. We're not recording it. We're just going to talk, shoot the shit, and hang out. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. Oh, and also, we've started to put up subscriber-only posts and essays. So right now on Patreon, there is a subscriber-only essay I put up this week. If you were interested in listening to, as my friend Mike calls this, gay shit. Are you going to talk about gay shit? I talk about gay shit in this piece. It's a reflection on outgrowing your heroes and your idols, and it's about my relationship over the relationship in my head with Madonna over 30 or 35 years of being a fan. So if you're interested, sign up and support us and you get access. Speaking of gay shit, here's some gay shit I wish I didn't have to talk to you about. This past week, an institution in the gay male community, the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, put out a video that has to be seen and heard to be believed. They sing a song called "We'll Convert Your Children." And yes, before you object, yes, I know they say, it's funny, it's tongue-in-cheek. We don't mean it that way. We're making fun of you for thinking we're that kind of people. Take a listen and see what you think.
As we celebrate Pride and the progress we've made over these past years, there's still work to be done. So to those of you out there who are still working against equal rights, we have a message for you. You think we're sinful? You fight against our rights. You say we all lead lives you can't respect. But you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. You can keep them from disco, warn about San Francisco, make him wear pleated pants, we don't care. We'll convert your children. We'll make them tolerant and fair.
At first I didn't get why you'd be so scared of us turning your children into accepting, caring people, but I see now why you'd have a problem with that.
Just like you worried, they'll change their group of friends. You won't approve of where they go at night to protests. Oh, and you'll be disgusted when they start finding things online that you've kept far from their sight. Like information. Guess what? You'll still be alright. We'll convert your children, yes we will.
Reaching one and all, there's really no escaping it.
'Cause even grandma likes RuPaul.
And the world's getting kinder.
Gen Z's gayer than Grindr. Learn to love, learn to vogue, face your fate. We'll convert your children. Someone's gotta teach them not to hate. We're coming for them.
We're coming for your children.
We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them.
Your children will care about fairness and justice for others. Your children will work to convert all their sisters and brothers.
your pride. No, you don't have to worry, because there's nothing wrong with standing by your side. Get on board in a hurry, because the world always needs a bit more pride. Come on, try a little pride. We'll convert your children, then we'll turn to you. Giving up the fear inside is freeing like you never knew. Go and see San Francisco.
Go and turn up that disco.
You'll forget you were ever upset.
We'll convert your children and make an ally of you yet. We'll make an ally of you yet. We'll make an ally of you yet.
Jesus Christ. I'm sorry for the dead air, folks. I have a little bit speechless. See, when I was younger, starting, I think I was 14 or 15 years old when I first started attending a gay youth support group in Syracuse, New York. I came out young. I came out when I was 12 in 1986. And in 1986, that was unusual. I didn't know any other kids my age who had come out as gay. And, well, of course, I came out formally, but it's not like other people didn't know. And yeah, it wasn't easy being a gay kid in the 80s. It was not easy being out in high school. I felt compelled. I have a really hard time lying. I always have. That doesn't mean I haven't lied. I have lied. I lied about a lot of things in my life, mostly to myself, for a long time. But my conscience eats at me. And I couldn't lie to people. I couldn't be like the other kids, the other gay kids. They weren't out, but I knew who they were, and they knew I knew. And I was a threat to them, and they harassed me as much as the homophobic straight boys did. Because I was a threat to them. I threatened to blow their cover. That's what they thought of me. It's not like I went and said, I'm going to tell everybody you're a faggot. You know, I didn't need to. Everybody thought that anyway. So I got beat up. I had gay pornography stuffed in my locker. I had my house telephone number written in the men's room, both at my job at a grocery store and in the high school bathroom. That was being a gay kid in those days. So I went to the gay youth support group and met other young people having social problems like I was having. It was good. It was, I hate how everybody's stolen the language. It was affirming, right? It was actually validating to talk to other teenagers who felt as I did and who had experienced the things that I had experienced. And that was my introduction to gay culture. And very quickly, youth group escalated into going to gay and lesbian dances that were held at community centers that were put on by local colleges. So places that were not really for kids like me, but that I snuck into anyway. We all did, right? We all tried to get fake IDs, get into the gay bars. It's harder to get into the gay bars, but you could certainly get into any of these college-age dances. And by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I had a social life that was full of adults. And You're not supposed to say this because it doesn't sound good and it frightens people and it challenges their notions of fairness and tolerance. But you know what? Pederasty, the adult sexual interest in adolescents and teenagers was rife among gay men when I was that age. When I would go to these dances, when I would go to these parties, when I would go to political protests, grown men, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, my senior, were trying to pick me up. Or they were tweaking my nipples through my shirt. Or they were slipping their hands down my pants to touch my ass or to grab my crotch. Every single time. This is endemic. I doubt it's different today. We have no boundaries whatsoever. You cannot convince me that it's different today. I bet it's worse. This kind of behavior is excused among gay men. And how do they excuse it? Well, it's probably too much to go into in this segment. I'm going to return to this in future shows. But the reason I set it up this way is all the protests, all the affected indignation that you sometimes hear from gay men. We're not pedophiles. We're not after your children. Well, of course, you shouldn't be pedophiles. You shouldn't be after children. And it's not as if gay man equals pedophile. But the reality of this culture is that it has very poor sexual boundaries, and there is a lot of active sexual adults who are targeting boys. I don't know how it is for lesbians. I didn't have that experience. Talk to your gay male friends. They will tell you the same thing. So this problem that we're not supposed to mention and that we're supposed to pretend the only people who believe that are bigoted people and conservative Christians and fundamentalists, they're not making it up. I lived it. Every gay man in this country has had an experience like this. It's real. So it makes it... Let me go back to the video so I get myself out of the weeds here. This is creepy on every level, and it doesn't become less creepy simply because the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus is objecting and saying the only people who think this is creepy are homophobes. Let's look at this video and let's listen to it. What are they saying? What's the shtick here? What are they trying to get across? If you watch this, that young man, the soloist who opened this video, I'm just going to give you my subjective impressions here. I'll be interested if you have a different impression, if you agree or disagree, leave a comment wherever you see this. I'll be interested to see what you all think about this. My subjective impression of that young man, he gave me the creeps. He gave me the cold shivers. Why? Dead eyes, first of all. Dead, expressionless eyes. Very little blinking, but a very direct stare right into the camera. Facial expressions that changed, and I know they're doing a music video, they're doing cues, right? Acting is involved here. I get that. I understand that. Still, it gave me the creeps. I felt like I was watching somebody simulate human emotions. That didn't read as genuine to me. The snark, the gay sass. I expect that sort of stuff, but I found it creepy. And I got the impression that this was somebody who was having a laugh at me, the audience member, knowing that he was in the cultural catbird seat. that he got to poke fun at the homophobes and the paranoid people who would make up these monstrous lies about what gay men are like. But that he was having a laugh, knowing that I could see through something, and he was still going to come out the good guy. People were still going to say, you're making stuff up. It's just a joke. That's how it came across to me. And yeah, I know it's supposedly a joke, but why are you going to joke about something so serious as it's not about converting children? They're making a play on the idea that since gays and lesbians can't naturally reproduce, they have to seduce, they have to recruit, right? This was an epithet that has been hurled at us for a long time. I don't think it's funny, and I don't think the joke works. I think it reads as creepy. And I have to think to myself, what in the world is going on with all of you who thought this was a good idea? You know what it is? I think this is deliberate baiting. The choice to do this is to deliberately bait people into making what they would call homophobic remarks or displaying their prejudice or reacting in any way negatively so that men like this can point and say, you're the dirty-minded one. You're the bigot. You're the hater. We're just nice, sweet boys. Did you notice him with his mannerisms? I know you can't see me if you're only listening, but I'm imitating this guy. He you know what? It's the bitchy gay coquette. That's what he was doing. The joke fell flat for me. And I've talked to a couple of people about this since I saw this video. Kevin and I, the producer, were talking about this before the show. And he had the same question. What is going through these men's mind? How is it that of the 80 to 100 people that we saw in that video square, these men in the chorus, that none of them said, this is in bad taste, it's a bad idea, it's too fine a line to make a joke about? Nobody said that? Well, I don't know. Maybe there were other members of the chorus who are not pictured here who did not approve of this and didn't want to take part in it. But there may be another explanation. It may be that very few of them actually thought this was a bad idea. And why would that be? I had this conversation with a gay man friend of mine named Dennis from the UK. I think what we call, well, first of all, I can say the word gay community, but it doesn't mean the same thing in 2021 that it meant in 2010 or in the year 2000 or in 1990 or 1986. In popular discourse, we don't have a gay community anymore. We have been subsumed and assimilated into something called LGBTQ+. We, homosexuals, the original gay people, not like New Coke, classic Coke, we have been assimilated. We don't have an identity to assert anymore. We don't have a social grouping to assert anymore because we are considered part of LGBTQ, no matter how many of us have run from it and are kicking and screaming and resisting being dragged back into it. What the public sees of our community, such as it were, is a level of depravity that is far worse than what was there in my youth. If you go to pride parades today, this is why people don't want their children to go there. It isn't because they're bigots. It's because these are cesspools. They are sewers. They are sexual sewers. You go to a pride parade, and you will get the classic stuff. And the classic stuff that was going on, my first pride parade was 1989 in New York City, 20th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. I had a glorious time. I should not have been there. I was 15 years old, and I should not have been there. It was way too adult. Nonetheless, it was a wonderful adventure for a 15-year-old. But even in those days, you had the men in jock straps and bikini bottoms gyrating to disco on top of floats. There was a lot. there wasn't, I don't think there was actual outright nudity, but there was everything but. There was a lot of sexual innuendo and outuendo, if that's actually a word, which I know it isn't. They've always been sexually charged, pride parades, despite anybody's objections. Don't let them fool you. They've always been sexually charged. But today, you not only have that, you have men in leather harnesses and costumes made out of leather to make them look like dogs, on all fours, being walked around by leashes by their masters. You have flogging demonstrations, sadomasochism. You have sometimes open sex happening right out in public, on streets, in broad daylight. You even have sometimes what they call water sports, which is pissing on each other. I've seen this at gay prides, and I've seen it in pictures of gay prides. That's the kind of perverse bullshit that these people are taking pride in. And this is why so many homosexuals like me want nothing to do with this anymore. So I think that what's going on here is when the character of a social grouping changes, the filters for admission change as well. And over time, as people have worked to break down boundaries, to say that any hesitation about sexuality is prudery, that you're trying to keep children just from knowing that other people live their lives in a way that makes them happy, but it's just non-standard. There's nothing perverse about it. There's nothing wrong with it. All of this has come and come and come until we're at the point where we actually have people. This was in the Washington Post a week ago. There was a young mother writing an essay about how kink, sexual kink, yes, does indeed belong at Pride, and I want my kids to see it. That was in the headline. Yes, kink belongs at Pride, and I want my kids to see it. This is a featured opinion in the Washington Post. That is where we are now. Do you think perverts can't see this? Do you think that predators can't see this? Do you think that people who get sexual titillation from breaking boundaries can't see this? Of course they can see it. And they are selecting themselves into what used to be a community that I was a part of. And I would guess that over time, more and more people like me have been filtered out. We've been made unwelcome. We've been told that we are the problem. We have been told that we are as bad as the moral majority of the late 70s and early 80s. Doesn't matter if we're homosexuals, we're bigots and oppressors too, because we think there ought to be sexual boundaries. So who's left? Who's left in the community? Who are the people left who are going to do things like join a chorus, produce videos, put this stuff in front of the public? I think it's a reasonable assumption to think that there's a much higher proportion of people with very little respect for boundaries than there used to be. So I don't know if any of the men in this chorus objected to it, but if they didn't, I would guess that it's because the character of the population has changed. You can do disgusting things, you can do perverse things, and you can claim that it's for your liberation, and you are socially applauded for it now, today. Not just on the extreme left, but in the mainstream left. The Washington Post. Yes, kink belongs at Pride, and I want my kids to see it. It's enough of that. I want to close up by talking about words, word magic. Word magic is real. Words can have the power of magical spells. They can enchant. They can bewitch. They can hypnotize. A couple of words that are magical now, that have the power of a magical incantation. Trans and union. Both of those words are magical incantations for the political left. If you put the words trans in front of something, or the word union in front of something, or if you draw the association, for most people on the left, instantly that means this is a good thing. So it's an enchantment, right? Or it's an enchantment, but maybe the magic that it works is that it's a blinding spell or a sleeping spell. Because you stick the word trans in front of somebody and they automatically get a halo. When people hear it, halo goes up. Oppressed person, just trying to live their best life, trying to live their authentic self. Always a victim. If ever they say that someone's victimizing them, believe them. It blinds you to the possibility that the person in front of you may actually have bad character. They may be untrustworthy. They may be dishonest. They may be manipulating you, and they may have an ulterior agenda that is not nearly as cuddly and smiley as what they're presenting to you. Same thing happens with union. Leftists are very pro-union. I don't know how I feel about unions anymore. I used to be very pro-union, but I've seen so much bad behavior from them and so much chicanery that I'm re-examining what I think about them. I mean, we talked about this, in this episode. The National Association of Teachers, the American Federation of Teachers, the largest teachers unions in this country, who have been instrumental in keeping schools closed for a year by stoking COVID panic and making children pay the consequences of locking down by missing their education or having hybrid education. Well, it's just as good. It's just some of it's on a computer and some of it's, This is union activity behind critical race theory and lying, right? Straight up, at least unions are straight up lying to you. But union and trans are magical incantations that place a blinding spell over the eyes of people who identify as being culturally and politically left. And most of these people, even though I don't agree with them anymore, most of these are decent people. They're not personality disordered people. They're not predators. They're not manipulators. They're naive. They're not reflective. And they don't understand that they've been caught up. And they don't understand that they've been bewitched. I want to read to you a little bit to close out here from a really powerful essay that addresses this from a different angle. It's called Pronouns Are Rohypnol. And Rohypnol is what you know as the date rape drug. Okay? This is an essay by a British woman written 1 to 2 years ago, if I remember correctly. I remember when she first posted it. She posted it on Mumsnet, which is a UK forum for parents. Almost all mums, but, some dads there too. I'm not a member there, but I have browsed that forum for years now, because there's a lot of interesting political discussion, and it's one of the places that women who have been affected by the trans juggernaut, either their husbands have transed, it's happening to their children, they've lost their job, or they've lost their respectable standing in the community because they've advocated for single-sex spaces. So a lot of that discussion happens on Mumsnet. So I remember when this essay was first posted. I'll read to you some of it. The author is Bara Carr, and I don't know if that's a pseudonym or her real name. It's Barra, last name Kerr. Pronouns are Rohypnol. There's a lot of chat around pronouns right now, specifically preferred pronouns, by which is usually meant the pronouns a person would prefer other people to use when they are the subject being discussed by those people. This is how I want you to talk about me. Almost without exception, the people who request or demand others talk about them using specific pronouns are asking for pronouns associated with the opposite sex to their own. A simple politeness, a courtesy. I've heard many people tell me they don't mind doing this as a courtesy, although it takes some effort to keep up the mental gymnastics of perceiving one sex but consistently using pronouns for the other. I've also heard many people declaring that anyone who won't comply is obnoxious, mean, hostile, and unpleasant. Misgendering is hate speech, they say. But I refuse to use female pronouns for anyone, male, because pronouns are like Rohypnol. One of the biggest obstacles to halting the stampede over women's rights is pronoun and preferred name courtesy. People severely underestimate the psychological impact to themselves and to others of compliance. Pronouns are like rohypnol to your brain's defenses. You doubt the absurd claim I just made, obviously. You have the fortitude of mind to be uninfluenced by such trivia. And I've got this wrong. I understand. Bear with me. And try this quick experiment that looks at the cost of using preferred pronouns yourself. I'm going to break away a minute here. And I'm not going to read the whole essay, but I suggest that you do look up pronouns or rohypnol. She asks the reader, this probably works better visually, so I don't know that it's going to work as I speak to you. But she brings up a psychological test called the Stroop test. Back to the article. It's a well-known name that color psychological phenomenon. A quick and simple experiment where you have to say the color of the words that are written in front of you. Simple as that. Except the speed and accuracy of your answers is heavily impacted by any incongruence between the color you see and the actual word itself. You'll find that you have to consciously fight the conflict of input to your brain each and every time. It leaves you confused, distracted, slower, frustrated, and fatigued. Forcing our brains to ignore the evidence of our eyes, to ignore a conflict between what we see and know to be true and what we are expected to say affects us. And let me describe the Stroop test for you. We have an image here, so those of you who are watching on video will be able to see the image. But for those of you who can't, picture a black square that is filled with words, and all these words are the names of color. Blue, green, yellow, magenta, cyan, over and over again. Red, yellow, blue, green, purple. The trick, though, is that the actual word green, for example, Green, you see the word green spelled out, but the actual color of the letters is red. So the word green is actually painted in red. And that's how the test works. It measures how long it takes people to resolve the conflict between what they know intellectually and what they can see in their senses when they're being asked to look at a form of an opposite, right? And this happens with pronouns. This happens. You can't fight this stuff. It's subconscious, right? This is how humans make meaning and communicate meaning to each other. It does put you at a psychological disadvantage. One more bit from that. Pronouns are like rohypnol because they dull your defenses. They change your inhibitions. They're meant to. You've had a lifetime's experience learning to be alert to him and relaxed about her. And she's talking about the fact that, you know, if you're walking down a dark street, you see a group of men coming at you, you have a different psychological reaction than a group of women coming at you because you know that the men are more likely to be physically dangerous. So she says, for good reason. This instinctive response keeps you safe. It's not even a conscious thing. It's like your hair's standing on end. Your subconscious brain is helping you not get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger that your eyes haven't noticed yet. Yes, I agree. Words act like witchcraft. They act like an enchantment or a sorcery. And manipulating language and reversing words, inverting their meanings, takes a psychological toll on us. It makes us work harder, but it also starts to make us question our sanity. We feel that mismatch between the concept and the representation of the concept and the fact that it's being used in a non-standard way, but we're not supposed to indicate that we know it's being used the wrong way, because if we indicate that, we're showing that we are a bad person socially. This is by design. A way to look at this is gaslighting. So I guess I would say, if you're being enchanted by words, if you're under a spell, recognize that spell. That's step one. Recognize it. Recognize what's happening to you and say out loud what's happening to you. Point out the witchcraft. Point out the spell. Point it out for yourself, but point it out for other people. Point your finger back at the enchanter so people can see him. Call his bluff. Break the spell. Because once you break the spell, other people will wake up too. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us. And thank you.